The spring sun had barely risen over the rooftops of Alderwood Hills when Claire Donovan pulled her battered Chevy into the driveway of the modest house she'd worked years to afford. It wasn't much. The porch steps creaked. The garden still needed love, but it was hers. After losing her husband in a warehouse accident and working double shifts as a hospital custodian to stay afloat, this home marked the first time in nearly a decade she felt the ground beneath her was steady. And she wasn't alone. Her dog, Roski, a massive, sweet-natured mastiff mix rescued from an abusive owner, was her silent shadow. Her companion. Her comfort. Alderwood Hills marketed itself as a community of peace and order, its glossy brochures adorned with families walking golden retrievers and sipping iced tea on manicured lawns. Claire, with her calloused hands and quiet eyes, didn't quite fit the aesthetic. And neither did Roscoe. His size alone drew wary glances. And his bark, deep but rare, sent neighborhood curtains twitching. But Claire kept to herself, tended her garden, and taught Roscoe every command in the book. Still, one neighbor took special offense to their presence. Marlene Cutler. She was the self-appointed queen of Alderwood's HOA, with a permanent scowl and a clipboard fused to her arm. Marlene roamed the streets like a prison warden, scolding teenagers for riding skateboards too loudly and measuring grass with a ruler. She welcomed Claire the day she moved in with a smile so forced it looked painful. "We take pride in uniformity," she said, glancing at Claire's pickup. Then Roscoe, "We do hope your lifestyle won't disrupt our tranquility." Claire nodded and shut the door. Then the harassment began. At first, it was subtle. Anonymous notes taped to her mailbox about Roscoe's barking, warnings about her non-standard porch lights, her compost bin mysteriously vanishing. Claire ignored it all, knowing Marlene wanted a reaction. But everything changed the morning Roscoe was pepper sprayed. Claire had been kneeling in her garden, hands deep in soil, when she heard a strangled yelp from the backyard. Roscoe, who never barked unless necessary, let out a howl that made her blood freeze. She dropped her gloves and sprinted toward the noise. Through the fence slats, she caught a glimpse of Marlene's wide frame retreating, a small canister clutched in her hand. Roscoe was coughing, eyes clenched, foam at his muzzle. Claire hauled his 140-pound body into her arms and rushed him to the vet. The diagnosis: commercial-grade pepper spray, likely sprayed directly at his face. "He's lucky," the vet said. "If this had hit both eyes, he could have been blinded." Claire filed a police report. The officers showed up 2 hours late and looked bored before she even opened her mouth. "Any video?" one asked. When she said no, they scribbled something and left. Marlene, of course, denied everything, claimed Roscoe lunged at her through the fence. No charges were filed. Claire sat awake that night with Roscoe's head resting on her lap, fury bubbling just under the surface. This wasn't just neighborly squabbling. This was targeted abuse. And the worst part? Marlene knew she could get away with it. She counted on Claire's silence, on her exhaustion. But Claire wasn't going anywhere. She started documenting everything, every note, every comment, every time Marlene stared too long from across the street. She read the HOA bylaws cover to cover and found no clause allowing chemical deterrence against pets. Her late husband's lawyer helped her draft formal complaints and FOIA requests. Still, the harassment escalated. One morning, Claire found a sign staked into her lawn: "Beware, aggressive animal on premises. Children at risk." Claire scanned it, emailed it to her attorney, then ripped it out of the ground. She didn't knock on Marlene's door. She didn't scream. She got even. At the next HOA meeting, Claire showed up in a clean blazer, thick folder in hand, and sat at the front. Marlene blinked when she saw her. When the committee opened the floor, Claire stood and laid out her case: the veterinary report, the police file, printed photos of her yard, timestamps, training logs for Roscoe, and highlighted HOA bylaws. Her attorney spoke next, cool and precise. He brought up legal precedents, selective enforcement patterns, and reminded the board that any further inaction could be seen as complicit behavior. Marlene tried to speak, but it was too late. The room had turned. 2 days later, the board issued a formal letter. Marlene was suspended from HOA enforcement activities pending review. The signed complaint was dismissed. Roscoe was cleared of any aggressive label. But Marlene wasn't done. She retaliated from the shadows. Claire's trash bins were knocked over. Her truck was keyed. Surveillance cameras were flagged as privacy violations in anonymous city reports. So Claire installed more cameras. One night, at 2 a.m., her backyard camera caught a silhouette standing motionless at her fence for nearly 3 minutes. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It only watched. Claire sent the footage to her lawyer. A restraining order was filed the next morning. Then came the final straw. A city notice arrived. Roscoe had been labeled a potentially hazardous animal after anonymous complaints of biting, chasing, and barking, none of which matched any real incident. Claire knew it was fake. Her lawyer challenged the designation immediately. They demanded records, complaint sources, and internal memos. They also hired a private investigator. Within 2 weeks, the PI found 2 former Alderwood Hills residents who had left after eerily similar harassment campaigns. Anonymous fines, baseless reports, damaged property, all traced back to Marlene. Claire's legal team presented their findings to the city council during a public hearing. This time, officials paid attention. The data, the interviews, the camera footage all painted the same picture. Marlene wasn't just a cranky neighbor. She was weaponizing bureaucracy. When confronted, Marlene denied everything until digital evidence linked the complaints directly to her IP address. The room went quiet. Her smirk disappeared. Marlene Cutler was permanently removed from the HOA. The city issued a formal caution and opened an investigation into HOA misuse across multiple districts. Claire's case became the catalyst. In the weeks that followed, Alderwood Hills changed. Neighbors who had once avoided Claire now offered waves or soft apologies. Roscoe lounged on the porch without fear. The garden bloomed again. And Claire, though exhausted, stood taller. When the city asked her to speak at a workshop on HOA abuse, she hesitated. But then she remembered how Marlene operated, in silence, in shadows. So Claire stood before a crowd and told her story. Not to be a hero, but to make sure the next woman wouldn't have to. She ended her speech with a quiet truth. Some people fight with fists, others with fear. I fought with evidence, and I won. And in that room, there was no applause, just respect. Back home, as the sun dipped below the fence line, Claire sat on her porch with Roscoe curled at her feet. And for the first time in months, peace wasn't just a dream. It was hers.